Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Why We Believe show. Our guest today is Portia Louder. She's a former wedding photographer whose picture-perfect life collapsed when poor decisions led to a federal indictment for mortgage fraud, leading to a 4.5-year prison sentence. What could have been the end of her story became the beginning of her great transformation. Behind bars, Portia experienced a spiritual awakening that redefined her understanding of grace, worth, and redemption. Now, a national speaker and entrepreneur and author of Living Louder, A Compassionate Journey Through Federal Prison, Portia shares her message of second chances with audiences from schools to correctional facilities. Her journey proves that our lowest moments can become the foundation for our greatest purpose, and that through faith, even federal prison can become sacred ground. Welcome to the Why We Believe show, where members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints share their inspiring stories of faith and conversion to the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm your host, Nathan Gwilliam. Thank you so much for being with us today, Portia.
Yeah, thank you. I love that sacred ground, because that's really what that experience became to me. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. I kind of feel like I want to use every minute as effectively as possible in this interview. I want to as little fluff as possible because I feel you have so much value to add to the audience. So I think we should just dive right in. And can you tell us your story?
Yeah, I would love to. So I am the oldest of 7 children, and my parents were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but they were pretty non-traditional. So, and what I mean by that was that my mom was this super hippie who didn't believe in any rules or boundaries, which LDS and rules and boundaries, right? So I grew up in Utah on the outskirts of a small town, and my dad was a Vietnam vet. So he had PTSD. He'd been shot twice when he was in Vietnam. So my dad liked structure and rules. He got up early, took care of the animals, had a job, and had a side business. And then my mom was a very creative photographer, and she loved all things outdoors. For me, as the oldest of those 7 kids, I really started to struggle with the rules and boundaries thing by the time I was about 13. And school was difficult for me, and church was difficult for me because it was just very different than the way I was raised. So when I turned 13, I really started to struggle. And I think that's when I decided that what boys thought of me was the most important thing. And that's also when I told my parents, I'm not going to go to church anymore. I don't fit in there. And in our home, you kind of did what you wanted to do. Like, we had a lot of fun, but I don't ever remember reading scriptures or praying. It was just pretty chaotic, really. And so I quit going to church, and my teenage years were very difficult. And by the time I was 17, I was pregnant with my first child, moved out of my parents' home, moved into a low-income apartment. And I remember thinking, I just need to marry somebody. If somebody will marry me, my life will be okay. I had no big plan for my future. And I ended up meeting someone who was 10 years older than me. He was 28 and I was 18. And he made me the offer. He said, Portia, you should marry me because I take care of you. So we got married, and I only knew him about a month. And about that time, my dad was transferred from this little town to Salt Lake City for work. Now, I had never been to Salt Lake. Like, my life was very small. And so I remember coming up and visiting my parents with my son and being blown away that there was a whole world outside this town. And I went back and I told my husband, I want to move to Salt Lake and get a job and live with my parents. And he said, I'm never leaving this town. We don't even get along. Let's just get divorced and you can go live with your parents. So, like, we had been married about a year. It just wasn't, the commitment wasn't firm for us. So we got divorced. I moved to Salt Lake. And shortly after I got to Salt Lake, I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. So it was a pretty lonely time for me. I got a job, and I remember my dad telling me, Portia, you might want to try to read the Book of Mormon. It might help you, that could. And I said, Dad, why would I ever want to read the Book of Mormon? I don't want to go to church. And he said, because you're smarter than that, and you haven't even tried to read the Book of Mormon. And so, my dad would read. I noticed him in the morning, he would read scriptures. So I started to read the Book of Mormon, and I felt comforted. I didn't, at that point in time, I wasn't really committed to going to church or anything, but I do remember feeling some comfort when I would read the Book of Mormon at night. And when my daughter was born, my dad asked if he could take her to church and bless her. So I went to the church and I watched my dad bless my daughter. And I looked around at all the other people there and I thought, they all seem happy. Maybe if I just get married like they are, I'll be okay too, you know? And so I started dating again. And I wasn't really very good at dating. And I ended up pregnant again. I was 23 years old, pregnant with my third child. I had 2 children that didn't have a father and I didn't get any child support. And I remember being scared and saying my first real prayer, which was just, Heavenly Father, please help me. I don't know what to do. And I felt something. I felt strength. I felt strength I hadn't felt before in my life. And I knew that I needed to place my son for adoption. And so I started looking for a family. And I remember telling my mom and my dad told me, he believed in me. He said, you're strong, Portia, and I know that you can do this. And I met this family. They were wonderful. They came to all my doctor appointments. And the day my son was born, they were with me at the hospital. And I remember watching them hold him for the first time. And then my son this family walked out of the room because they had children as well that they wanted to go and connect with my son. And I remember watching him walk out of the room and I just felt so empty inside. Like I didn't know how to process trauma or why I was feeling what I felt.
Portia, can I jump in really quick?
Sure.
Portia, I haven't mentioned this to you before, but I've spent almost 25 years of my career working in adoption. I created adoption.com and I'm very, very familiar with and passionate about adoption. So I'm loving this adoption story that you're sharing.
Well, what's interesting is that this family that chose, I actually really searched for them. And I knew as soon as I saw their picture that this was the family that was supposed to raise my son. And not just for them, not just for my son, but for me, because my mother was not strong enough to make those kinds of decisions. In fact, when I told her I was going to place my son, she said, why don't you let me raise him? And I said, no, Mom, this child belongs to someone else, you know? And they were the ones that really supported me through that pregnancy, coming to all the doctor appointments because I was very alone. And for me, it was like the greatest sacrifice I could make. Like I knew at that point in my life, it was the one thing that I could do right because I had made a lot of bad choices. But I didn't understand therapy. I didn't understand trauma. And as soon as my son was born, it was beautiful. And then they walked out of the room and I was like, why do I feel the way I feel? And I thought, well, I'll just go back to work. I'll be okay. But I wasn't okay. I didn't get any support or help. And I ended up using prescription drugs at first to kind of fill the emptiness. And my life got a lot worse. And I couldn't I didn't know. I was a single mother with 2 children and I had a son I placed for adoption. I could barely take care of the 2 kids I had. And so trying to have a relationship with this family as well, it just wasn't working. And I ended up losing my job. My drug addiction got much worse and I was gone all the time, but my parents were caring for my 2 children. And I wasn't talking to the family that adopted my son. And this took about a year and a half. And one night I came home and it was very late. And when I walked in the house, my mom was standing there with my son, my 8-year-old son, and he had been crying, waiting for me for hours. And my mom just looked at me and said, Portia, I can't imagine what it would take for you to change your life. But if this little boy isn't enough for you, nothing ever would be. And that night, I walked downstairs and I laid on the floor and I sobbed and I just begged God to take it from me. I said, please, I can't suffer anymore. I'm so tired. And my son came over and he goes, Mom, it's okay. Don't be so sad. And I said, Jace, I'm such an ugly person. And he goes, no, Mom, you're beautiful. And he said, come look in the mirror, Mom, come see, you're beautiful. And I knew that night, I said, I will go to any length. Just show me the path out. And the next day I walked upstairs and I said, Dad, I need help. I don't know what to do. And my dad he had kind of given up on me. My dad's like this tough guy, right? He's been to Vietnam. He's like, Portia, you need help. He said, you better go talk to the LDS bishop across the street because I've tried everything and I don't know what to do for you. And so I walked across the street and I knocked on the door and I said, I'm Cliff's daughter and I'm a drug addict. I need help. I don't know what to do. And this man who I love opened the door and let me in, and he was honest with me. He told me, you might be the most selfish person I've ever met. He was honest with me. And I've learned to be grateful for people who will tell you the truth, because he was in my corner. And he called somebody who was an addict in recovery to come share their story and tell me that there was hope. And he made me this promise. He said, Portia, I promise you with priesthood power and authority that if you will pray and read your scriptures and go to church, your whole life will change. I was so desperate for the whole life change. I did those things. Now, it was hard. I did not feel comfortable in church. I'd been gone for a long time. And every time I read scriptures, it said to me, Portia, you're a really bad person. Like the words didn't make sense to me. I felt very distant from our Father in heaven, but I kept doing it and I kept doing it. And my whole life changed. I started showing up in my kid's life. And I remember 6 months passed and I was sitting at a field trip with my son, that same little boy. And I was sitting at the zoo and I looked around at all the women there and I thought, God created this earth and it works in a perfect way. And here I am with my son. This is a miracle. God is solving all of my problems. He knows me. And the thing is, at that point, I knew I wasn't looking for a relationship because I suck at it, right? I'm not looking to try to find someone to marry me. But I ended up meeting my husband, who I'm married to, and he's amazing. He really is. And I have no idea how I tricked him into dating me because he had his life put together. He just graduated college. He'd been on a mission. And the first date we went on, I asked him, I said, Chad, what scares you the most about me? And he's like, Portia, everything about you scares me. Which is so valid, right? He knew that I'd placed my son for adoption. I have these children. Only through the power of God, we ended up getting married. And we went to the Mount Timpanogos temple. This is...
Oh, congratulations. That's wonderful.
This is the part of my story where when I go to the MTC and share it, I want to wrap my arms around every kid there because this is the beautiful part. But obviously you did the intro, so we know that there's some other hard things that come up, right? This is the part where if it would have we could have lived happily ever after here, because I didn't know a lot about the church. So I went to the temple every single week to learn more. And it was such a special time in my life to kneel at an altar with my children and my husband. He adopted my kids and we started building this new life. And I started my own photography company and my company really grew. It grew to the point that I was photographing about 200 weddings a year, which is crazy. So I have an energy in me that just makes things grow. And and I also have lots of kids. So besides the fact that my company was growing, we bought this little house and now my business is overrunning the house. I ended up having 2 more kids because that's what I do. I have children. I struggle with overfertility. So I've only tried one time to have a child. So we have these 2 kids, 18 months apart. We planned 1, but 2 showed up. And then my back went out and I had back surgery now. So this is a time in my life where I felt like, I'm going to church, I'm doing the right things, and my back goes out. And I didn't tell the doctor I had a prescription drug addiction. I didn't tell him. I just thought that I was in a good place. And when he prescribed me the drugs, I took them and I became dependent on those again. So I have learned this about myself. I cannot use any kind of a narcotic, not even a half a pill. It changes the way my brain thinks. And so I started down that path. I thought that I had it under control and I didn't. And I ended up thinking at this point we should build a new home, which was a good idea because we needed a studio and a home. And this was about the 2005 range. So I built a home. I got 2 small kids. I got 2 middle kids. My company is overflowing. And I decide that it would be a good idea for me to invest in real estate so that I don't have to work so much as a photographer. So I start building spec homes. I don't have enough going on, right? Now looking back, it's I should have scaled back. But I ended up getting involved in what was called equity deals in the 2006-07 range. And they're illegal. And I didn't start out thinking they were illegal, but if I'm honest, I felt it the first time I got involved in one of these deals and knew I shouldn't do it. And I did anyway. And then my judgment just got worse. And this was a really scary thing for me because I heard that I was under federal investigation. And I remember thinking, I can't go to prison. I can't go to prison. I mean, I've worked so hard just to come back from, you don't understand. I just felt like there's no way that I would lose everything. I'd lose my marriage, my children, my, who I am in the community. It just felt like I had to keep fighting. So here's the second really important lesson. when you make a mistake, own that mistake as quick as you can, because denying the mistake only makes the mistake worse. So when the FBI showed up, if I would have said, okay, I made some mistakes, how can I make it right? That would have been a different outcome. But I started making excuses. I started saying, the banks are fully aware, which they were, but there's people doing a lot worse things than me. I didn't know what I was doing was wrong. Instead of saying, okay, I made mistakes, how can I make it right? And I just made them mad, and it drug out way longer and ended up being a very painful investigation and process for me. And finally, the day came where I was indicted, and then I ended up pleading guilty, and I had drug it out so long. Financially, we were completely destroyed. And I remember the day that I walked into the federal courthouse in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I remember walking in, and I realized then, what have I done? How could I, not just the mistakes, but how could I have drug it out this way and done this to my family? Like, I looked back at my husband and my children. Now, there's a very leveling process that takes place when you walk in a courtroom. Hopefully none of your listeners ever have that experience. But when they say the United States of America versus Portia Louder, that's when things feel so lonely. It's the most lonely feeling. And I remember looking back at Chad and thinking, how this is going to be so hard. This is going to be so hard. I just felt so sad. And I was facing 0 to 7 years in federal prison. That was my guideline range. And so before I went in the courtroom, I thought, I'll probably get like a year, maybe 0. Like I don't have a criminal history, but the day that I walked in, I was like, he's going to give me the maximum sentence. I could feel that. Like, everyone's mad at me. I haven't handled this very well. And that's what he did. I stood up and he said, I'm sentencing you to 84 months in federal prison. And
Wow.
yeah, I can't, there aren't
How
words.
did that feel? What went through your head when he said that?
It felt a bit like a death. Like there was this moment of shock where I could hardly breathe, and scared, and then concerned that my children were there and my husband was there, and I just very low. And what happened was, typically someone in my situation would get some time to say goodbye to their family, because I had been out on pretrial release. I wasn't a danger to society or a flight risk, but the judge wanted to take me into custody that day. And so he said, U.S. Marshals, take her into custody. So at that point, the prosecutor said, that's not what we're asking for, Your Honor. And my lawyer stood up, and he didn't really want to hear from either one of them. And then my husband stood up. My husband was crying, and he handed our youngest child. So I had a 7-year-old child. Basically, she's been alive as long as this man just sentenced me to prison. And he hands her to our oldest daughter, and he stands at the podium and he said, Your Honor, please don't do that to her today. Please give her time to say goodbye to our children, because she's going to need that to get through this experience. And I went from feeling like the lowest I've ever felt to feeling like a queen in that moment. I can't even describe, to have my husband stand there and advocate for me. I knew when I looked back at Chad that we would get through that experience together. And I attribute that, even though I was in a place of needing repentance. I had been talking to my stake president and my bishop, but I knew that I had a road in front of me. I attribute it 100% to our temple covenants, because we're married in God's temple. And there really is nothing on this earth that can divide you when you turn to Jesus Christ. And I felt that power of that covenant that day. And I knew we'd get out of it together. We'd get through it together. The judge gave me 8 weeks to say goodbye. And I walked out of that prison, and out of that courtroom, and my life has never been the same. Like, it literally, our older children took our younger children home. And on our way home, I looked at Chad and I couldn't even speak. I was so devastated. I couldn't even speak. I felt like, I can't believe this. Like, I must be the worst person, because my country just gave me the maximum sentence. Like, I am like an enemy to the whole country. Like, I have talked to so many people that have been through this experience that have literally felt the same way. There is a feeling of complete despair when you leave. Like, I talked to a woman in prison that was like this tough woman on the rec yard, and she said, I curled up in a ball and cried after I was sentenced. It really breaks you down. And so when we got home, I remember looking around and thinking, how could I have been such a fool? How could I have traded everything important in my life, my children, my time, my covenants, everything for money? How could I have done that? And our bishop and stake president, we've had the most support from our ward and our community, showed up at our house and gave us both a priesthood blessing. Like, talk about amazing people. We have people in our ward that just showed up and said, I don't even know what to say. I'm just going to come here and cry with you. Is there anything we can do? Like, that's the kind of love that we were shown. So I had this 8 weeks, and I remember driving my son to school the next morning, and I just cried the whole way. And my son was 14, and he goes, Mom, don't be so sad. And I said, Jackson, this is the most beautiful thing to be able to be with you like this. How could I have missed it? I missed all the beauty of my life. And that 8 weeks was spent with my children. And I remember the last day that I was there, I walked into each of my kids' rooms and I watched them sleep. And my husband just held me. And then I got up and I cleaned our whole house because I thought what a privilege it was to clean my house. And then my mom came to get the kids, and I said goodbye to the kids, and my mom had to turn away. She said, I cannot watch this. And I said, Mom, I need to say goodbye to my kids. And I just remember each of my children, like Jackson, who was 14, he's like, Mom, I'll be so strong. It's okay. I promise I'll take care of things. And my little one was just sad. My 7-year-old, she had these tangles in her hair. And then we got in the car and we drove away, and it was 14 hours because they don't have federal prisons in Utah. So I was a long ways away from home. And when I walked into that federal prison, Chad dropped me off. I remember it was so weird. It was so unceremonious. I know probably people think, well, why would it be? I guess I thought it would be scarier or something, but I walked in and they said, okay, you're done now, Chad, bye. I was like, what? And then they just had me go in. They gave me new clothes. And all of a sudden, everything was different. The whole world was different. I was in a cinder block world with a 7-year prison sentence. And I was so devastated, there aren't words to describe. I spent 3 days laying in my cell, and people ask, was I scared? No, I wasn't scared. I was so brokenhearted, I would have had to climb a ladder to get to scared. Like, scared was a level up for me. I was so devastated. And I remember my bunkie kept saying, you have to leave the cell because people are worried about you and they'll take you to medical and you don't want to do that. And I told her, go away. And then I got on my knees and I said the most important prayer I've ever said in my life, which was, Heavenly Father, I have failed everyone in my life. I failed my family and my community, and I failed you. And I feel like I'm in the deepest hole and I can't see my way out. I just need to know who I am to you. And sitting in federal prison, I felt the most incredible amount of love I've ever felt in my life. I felt an absolute knowing that I am a daughter of the Most High God, that I have an important purpose on this earth, and that I am loved and valued beyond anything I could ever comprehend. And I could see that every woman in that prison was so loved and valued beyond anything that I could comprehend. And I don't know why it took that much for me to get to a place of knowing who I am. But what I learned is that you can do really hard things when you know who you are. And it was really hard. I was gone for almost 5 years, 4.5, with the 3 months extra, I did almost 5. And I remember watching my children grow up without me. They would come to visit me and it would tear me apart every time they left. I was up every morning on my knees, praying, reading my scriptures. I slept with my Book of Mormon. I've read them all, believe me, over and over and over again. I fasted every single Sunday because I needed it, because my heart was so broken. And I got to a place where I could take complete ownership that I had done this to myself and my children. And I reached out and I asked for forgiveness. And I chose to make the best of that time. And it wasn't easy. I felt myself kneel before Jesus Christ. I felt these sacred moments that were heartbreaking, but sacred. And I would never undo it. That's the crazy thing. Like, it was the hardest thing. My marriage, it withstood the distance and the pain. Like, we felt very close as we walked through that together. Chad had to rebuild. He had to rebuild our whole life while he was taking care of kids and his wife was in prison. But what I did is I decided I am going to show up for the women here. And I started writing classes and teaching classes. And I met the most amazing women. I met this woman. She was 26 years old and she came into prison happy and joyful. Like as soon as I met her, I knew she was my eternal sister. I couldn't believe she was in prison. I said, "Why are you here?" And she said, "Oh, her life had been so difficult. Her father had passed away when she was 9 months old from suicide. Her mother had died from a drug overdose. She had become addicted to drugs. And she told me, Jesus has always been with me, Portia. I've always known he loves me. He's with me. He's always protected me. I'm so grateful to be in prison. This is my chance to change my life." And she would write kind notes to all the other elderly inmates. And when she left, the day that I left prison, she threw her arms around me and she said, "Portia, I love you so much. I love you so much." Because I went from one prison to another. And so I had to leave that prison. And we were roommates there. And she said, "Will I see you again?" And I said, "I promise you'll see me again." And when I got home, she reached out and told me, "I'm in college now, Portia. Can you believe it? Like I was a high school dropout. I'm in college and I'm on the dean's list and I got a job." She was so proud, you know. Well, she got a job working at a care center for the elderly because she loves the elderly. And she said, "I met this woman. She's my very best friend. Her name's Cecile. She's had a stroke and she's a member of your church." So Christina, people ask, "Well, did you share the gospel with her?" I was like, "Oh, I was trying to get what she had. I wanted what she had." Like I wasn't trying to give her what I had. I thought whatever she has, I want, right? But as she knew that I was a member of the church and I would read my scriptures and stuff and we'd pray together, but she was Christian and I was LDS. And then Cecile tells her, she said, "I have been waiting for you for 20 years. My husband died 20 years ago. I've been waiting for you. And once you get baptized, then I can go be with my husband." And so Christina takes the missionary lessons, and she was going to an AA meeting and met this guy named Woody, who had also been in prison. And he loved her light. He said, "You have so much light. I want what you have." And she said, "Well, I'm talking to these missionaries." So he goes and talks to the missionaries, and the two of them got baptized. And I flew out to Missouri, and I sat next to Cecile. We were both just crying, and it was the most blessed day. And then Cecile passed about a month later. Good for her. She got to go be with her husband. And a year later, I flew back to Missouri. And I was there the day Christina was endowed. And we sat together in the celestial room. And she looked at me and she said, "Portia, we met in prison. And today we sit in our Heavenly Father's highest kingdom of glory on the earth." And I felt eternal joy. Like I tell my husband, "I loved you the day we got married," but that kind of joy, that eternal joy, like it was the most, my heart and soul felt like they were going to burst. And now Christina is the young women's president in her ward. And she and I are like sisters. She is my eternal friend. And she's not the only one. I had another girl call me and say, "I want to come to Utah and I want you to be there with me the day I get endowed." And I met her in prison. Like I've had so many beautiful experiences. I waited 4.5 years for them to call my name over that prison. And the day that I walked out, my heart was so full. I had a box of letters and pictures. And I remember feeling like the richest woman on the planet. And I walked out of that prison and all the women on the compound came running out and cheering for me. They were like, "We love you so much, Miss Louder." And I was so happy. I felt like so scared to come back out here, but so excited and so joyful. And my husband was waiting for me with flowers. And the thing that's the coolest is that I really liked myself. Like by the time I left prison, my integrity had been restored and I felt so close to the Savior and so grateful. And I did not know that my life, I've been home now for 5 years. I had no idea what would come in my life, but I started sharing my experiences with the church and then on social media. The son that I placed for adoption saw me and he reached out and wanted to get to know me. So we've been able to reconnect and he now knows my children and his adoptive parents and I have a relationship, which is amazing. I wrote my first book. I was working in drug treatment and I just couldn't keep these experiences inside. I had to keep sharing them, you know, and now that's available in prisons across the country and it's available out here. And my story continues. And through Jesus Christ, it's beautiful. Like I know who I am because of Jesus Christ and I would never undo all that hard stuff. I just want people to know there's no depth to his atonement. There's no place you can go to hide from his love and his mercy, and he will restore all things because he has for me. And that's my story. And it's a lot, but.
What an amazing story. You are such an inspiration, Portia. But is there anything else you would like to add in addition to what you've already shared?
Yeah, I feel so much gratitude for what the Savior's done for me and for the life that I have. Because I've been in some places, I've been very low in my life, and I have joy. Nothing that I experience today compares to, my worst day is still beautiful every day. And that comes from Jesus Christ. So. And then I also feel this need to share a different narrative and story about the people that I met in prison, because it's not like we think. Like, if people knew, it changed my whole view of everything. And I feel pretty passionate about sharing that. So I feel like I'm a connector to it. Like, people want to help. Members of the church want to help. They want to make a difference. And a lot of times they don't know what to do. And when I share the story, they're like, oh, I see it. And I say, just cheer them on like you did me. Just believe in people like you did me, because that's what they need. And so that's what privilege. I get to go to the MTC and say that to all these missionaries. I've spoken to thousands and thousands of missionaries, and what a gift, So yeah, it's great. But I would love some guidance on what to do with my life in terms, I don't know. I just keep going and going and never slow down to make a plan.
In conclusion, why do you believe?
I believe because it is the truth, and because it has given me everything. I love the gospel so much. I love who I am to Jesus Christ so much. I love the community of the church so much. And I am the woman I am today because I believe. And I can't even imagine. I mean, you could take anything from me, but you can't take that. That's everything. It's the most important thing.
Yeah. Nothing better I can add to that. Thank you so much for being with us today, Portia.
You're welcome. It's an honor. I appreciate it.